Hi there, my name is Ken Munro and I am a security researcher and penetration tester, and I work for a firm called Pen Test Partners based out of the UK and the USA, and we spend a lot of our time looking at smart devices, so the Internet of Things. And now that we're working from home so much more as a result of the pandemic, I think the security and safety of smart devices has become so much more important. We're finding cases where smart devices are being used to carry out corporate espionage. So the devices we're putting in our home to make us feel safer and more secure are actually potentially exposing us. And what's really interesting is how often we find very similar issues. So one of the most common problems we find is around that of device identity. So that's the process of the smart device in your home identifying itself to the cloud platform as you, rather than someone else's device. And the first example I want to give is a piece of work we did a couple of years ago looking at some really cool smart cameras. These are actually really quite neat. They're much more secure now. They're battery powered. Their battery life is well over a month. You can stick them up inside or outside, and they talk wirelessly. Really interesting. The idea being is you can connect using your smartphone and you can see what's going on inside or outside your house. I think some of the later versions have actually got cameras and speakers on them, so you can even speak to someone who's trying to break into your house. And some of my colleagues were looking at the API requests. They were looking at the way that each device talked back to the cloud platform and how the cloud platform talked back to your mobile app using an API. And we found some interesting bits and pieces of information. And one of the first ones was the device identity. And we started looking into the mobile app and discovered the serial number. Now, that serial number looks a little bit like a MAC address. Actually, it wasn't, but it was unique per device. But how unique was it? Now, one of the first things we'll always try with any smart device, looking at the API, is switching around device identifiers. So trapping those requests, inserting a different device identity and seeing what happens. And in the case of this particular device, we changed the identity and with permission had access to someone else's camera. Now, this is actually our friend Scott Helm, another security researcher who had one of these cameras and gave us permission. And without anything more than his device identity, we had access to his camera. And he's got some great Lego, by the way. Anyway, this is quite worrying. So what was happening is when the device was identifying itself to the cloud platform, it was simply providing its device ID. So identified, which meant the hacker, in this case us, could come along with someone else's device identity, and the cloud platform did nothing more to verify who we were. So any attacker anywhere on the internet with a device identity could have simply accessed anyone else's camera feed. Now that's pretty worrying to me. Now, how was this being done? Now, in this particular case, it wasn't Mac. But in many cases, we find that devices identify themselves to their cloud platforms using their MAC address as identity. Now, why would you do that? Well, first of all, as a source of identity, it's very cheap because you've probably got a Wi-Fi module, you've probably got a Bluetooth module already on your device. So it's got to the power of 48 different combinations. So that's a really nice random identifier, right? Well, except that the first half of the MAC address is going to be the OUI, so the organizational identifier, which means you've only got 3 octets left. And very often you find that only the very last or the second last octets are actually used for identity, which means you've got a really simple process of a very small key space to brute force. So what you'd need to do is go through an enumeration attack. And in the case of the Swan cameras, actually every few device IDs was active. So we simply enumerate, so make requests. Does this device identify? Yes, great. I can see someone else's camera feed. Or the API replies no. So we know that device identity isn't currently being used. So this is a huge problem we find with devices. What we should be doing, what we should see is some signing of those requests. So each device has got a unique cryptographically robust identifier that's loaded to the device at configuration, and which means we can now cryptographically assure the identity of that device. So I know that when I connect to your camera, my camera, it's correct, it's the right one. Let's look at some other problems that happen. One of my favorite sites is Instacam. It's a really cool site it's a bit like Showdown, so the search engine for devices. If you know default camera passwords, you'll find numerous cameras on the public internet with no further device identification other than their default passwords. So you can go to instacam.org and you can see lots of people's stuff. So you can see people's driveways, their parking garages, you can see people's horses and even hairdressers. But even worse is you'll often find high definition cameras in offices pointing at people's screens. Now we've reduced the resolution on this particular image, but we could zoom in and see people's screens. This is bad, isn't it? So think about this when you're now working from home with a smart device, and that smart device is pointing at your screen. Now you've got a whole new attack vector. Those vulnerable cameras that didn't really matter for corporate security before, because they're in people's homes, are now a really, really important factor. Some real basics for your users when they're working at home. Please ensure they change the default passwords. While they're there, make sure they've got good Wi-Fi security on their home wireless routers. And do you really need remote access to look at your house? If you don't, turn it off. Next thing I want to look at is people's home alarms. Now, these didn't really matter for corporate security in the past, but over the last few years, we've been doing all sorts of work looking at connected and smart home alarms. So you might have a mobile app that maybe triggers your PIR. So when someone comes in, it'll set the alarm off or alert you on your phone so you can look at the cameras maybe. And so some really cool research done by some other researchers a few years ago that showed that the communications between the PIR, the sensor, and the alarm panel weren't properly secured. So you could really easily jam them. Even without intercepting the traffic, you could just jam the traffic. And certain types of alarm panel didn't detect the jamming. They just assumed the PIR had gone offline. And therefore, you come along with a box the size of perhaps a packet of cigarettes, jam the signal, and break into the house without the alarm going off, which was pretty concerning, right? We've also discovered smarter alarms that had vulnerabilities in their APIs that allowed you to attack the panel itself, found vulnerabilities in the panel, switch the panel off. So really quite serious for our home security, right? One of my favorite smart device hacks, though, I'm sure many of you have got Ring doorbells. We've had Ring doorbells since, crikey, 5 years ago, I think we first got one. And we found the very first vulnerability, we believe, in Ring doorbells, which is great. So this device, it's Wi-Fi, it sits on the outside of your house and it's connected, it's secured with 2 Torx T4 screws. All you need to do is walk up to someone's house, undo the screws, and get to the back end of it, and you'll see this red button. Now, I don't know about you, I have to press red buttons. If you press this one, when we first found the vulnerability, it reset the doorbell into a default state, which fired up a default access point, which you join without needing a password. But unfortunately, during that reset process, it didn't wipe your Wi-Fi PSK. So we could connect it to the doorbell, connect to the embedded web server with no passwords required because it's an open access point, and we could recover your wireless access point and your wireless password and join your wireless network, which is quite worrying, right? And I'm sure many people who have these didn't then change their router admin passwords, which means we can now compromise your home wireless router and potentially change where you're getting your DNS from. Now we can intercept all your traffic. Now, in fairness, Ring were really good about this. We told them they had it fixed within 2 weeks and they automatically pushed a firmware update. So really cool vendor. Unfortunately, they've had some more problems since. I also remember they had a database corruption problem. So when you pressed this, you got someone else's video feed, but they fixed that too. So things are improving. Another area of technology we've been looking at a lot in the home is the concept of smart door locks. Now, I'm sure some of you in apartments maybe have the concept of perhaps a fingerprint lock or a Bluetooth lock or a PIN lock or even a mobile app with your lock. The problem we find and keep finding is that many of the smart locks that we look at simply don't have good enough security. This is a wonderful one. It's on our blog. It's called the Ultra Lock, and unfortunately, it has a stack of security issues. One, for example, the API that you talk to using your mobile app to unlock it or check whether it's locked or unlocked has got a vulnerability that allows you to reset the lock pin remotely without authenticating, which means you can lock anyone out of their house and also get into their house. The funniest bit, though, is the physical security of smart locks often leaves a lot to be desired. And this particular one, you can see on the underside, there's a manual lock override. And what you can do is you see in the picture there, you can actually insert a lock pick and release this spring, which allows the door lock to open. So Real shame there. It's really worth looking at some of the research on our website about smart locks, because there's not many we found that we'd actually be happy to have on our own houses. Another mad lock with terrible physical security. This was a smart lock, and all you had to do, you could put a small drill through the casing and then flick the release spring, and it would allow the door to open. And it took less than 2 seconds to drill the case, because it wasn't made of case hardened steel. It was a very lightweight aluminium that's much easier to cast, so it's easy to make nice shapes, but it's very quick to drill. One of the challenges I have is when you do start looking at signing your device requests, is that crypto system itself needs to be really robust. And one of the real challenges you have is the game changer with IoT is, unlike a system that's in the cloud or on servers or whatever, actually you've given the device to the attacker, which means it's in their hands, which means they can take it apart and they can start looking at key storage and more. And one of the biggest goals we're looking for is, in a system where keys are used, can we recover that key material directly from the hardware on the device? And an example I want to give to you is one of my favorite shows, Mr. Robot. And you might remember there was an episode early on where the hacker compromised a smart thermostat by inserting a Raspberry Pi inside it. Now, we saw that and thought that was probably a little bit complicated. So using our knowledge of hardware security, we decided to see if we could actually do an attack against a thermostat itself and see if we could do more to it. Now, this was what started us off back in 2014. Someone tweeted saying, "Oh, my thermostat's got ransomware." Now, it didn't. It was a joke. But this was an incentive to us, our own capture the flag, our own CTF. Could we hack our own thermostat? And we started looking around. We found some candidates. You can do a lot of work starting with the FCC, so the Federal Communication Commission. You can get internal photographs, so you can start looking to see if there are test points. And on the right-hand side of that picture, you'll see 6 brass test points, which was a good flag for us. Now, we needed to get the firmware for this device. Sometimes it's hard. You have to pull it from the device itself. Sometimes you get lucky and find the manufacturer publish it on their own website. So we could very quickly reverse engineer that. We used binwalk to take the binary file back into a file system we recognize. Got some Linux. This is good. We know what we're doing now. Very quickly, we found a number of vulnerabilities. You'll see there's a CP, so copy command. It wasn't actually validating type. And what that meant is, instead of copying an image file, you could actually get it to copy any data. So the developers here really hadn't thought about validating input. Back to the same thing as SQL injection for web apps, right? You're not validating the type. So we could execute arbitrary commands at this point. And it was fascinating once we got access to the firmware, once we started reverse engineering it. I think what's really clear to me is a lot of developers don't realize that people like us exist and will reverse engineer their code. So this is a great example in the code, live shipping product. If the SSL connection failed, it was handled as the SSL shit status, which is pretty bad. And then the bit that made me laugh the most is the thermostat, which I've got just here, actually has, you can upload your own images to it, and you can actually wipe between those images, so you can display family images on it. And the routine that dealt with that was called the son of a bitch mode. I kid you not. I don't think that developer ever realized that people would be looking at his code later in life. So what we managed to achieve on the back of that was we successfully got ransomware running on a smart device for the first time ever as a proof of concept. As a result, we could encrypt people's thermostats and stop them getting access to heating. Now, yeah, so what? So you just rip it off the wall and put another one on. But it's still an interesting proof of concept. And there's been some more ransomware examples proved since then. Our big point with smart devices is that once you've got access to it, it shouldn't be game over. There should be plenty of other issues. Now, bear in mind we've got the device in the hands of the attacker. I want to show you another example. This comes from the automotive sector, where we did a lot of research. And one of the big problems you have is the car, the smart device, is in the hands of the driver. We were doing some work a little while back, and we were looking at the vehicle, looked at the telematics unit, the telematic control unit, or TCU. And from the point of view of a hacker, we've got access to the car now, right? It's our car, we're now in it. So can we connect to the TCU? Most telematics platforms that work within vehicles will start with a GSM modem. They'll layer over probably a private APN, point-to-point daemon. They'll probably layer over that some form of encryption, probably SSL, TLS. And that will give you a route through to the telematics head end, the server, which, excuse me, does all the work. What we discovered is once we were inside the vehicle, we could connect the TCU directly. We could then use that to connect the telematics platform, but also found on there some credentials, some domain credentials on the telematics platform that allowed us to access the corporate domain. So that meant that we had compromised our client's corporate network from a car. It shouldn't be game over once you're into the vehicle. Now, they fixed that very quickly, thank goodness. But we also find examples of telematics platforms left on the public internet, which is pretty worrying. How do you go about getting these keys out of the devices once you've got access to it? Well, a good example, one of my very first pieces of research with my colleagues was a smart kettle. Why do you have a smart kettle? I don't know. The idea being you can turn it on remotely. Unfortunately, this one only actually worked from the same Wi-Fi network you were on, so you could only do it from home. So you could be sat in your living room, and you could use your mobile app to turn on the kettle in your kitchen, saving you maybe 30 seconds of your life. I don't know. Anyway, the problem that the manufacturer had is they chose a Wi-Fi module to build their smart stuff on their kettle. They chose a module with no security features. Their later up version, which was actually built into a smart coffee machine I've got over here, this one, we did some work on this about 3.5 years ago, and they'd moved from the VSDO3, which has no secure storage on it at all. They'd moved to the ESP8266, which also has no secure storage. More recently, they've replatformed, and many vendors have actually gone to look at the Expressive Systems ESP32, which has much better security offerings. But unfortunately, it's had some security problems along the way too, which is a real shame. The latest version of the Smart Kettle uses a platform from a company called Electric Imp, which is really nice and robust. Rather entertainingly, 4 years ago, we showed a complete lack of security on this. It meant you could run arbitrary code remotely. And then some more researchers then decided to run ransomware on it too. Why did ransomware a coffee machine? I don't know, but hey, it meant you couldn't make good coffee anymore. So what the learning from this is when you're building a smart device, please make sure you've got a good, secure chipset that offers security support. So secure enclave, trust execution environment, good source of entropy, good key storage, all those things. Because if you don't choose a chip that does that, you're in real trouble later on because you can't apply it later. Other problems, think about how you distribute your key material. So you might have a really good secure environment, a really good secure chip on your smart device, but if you can't get the keys to the production line efficiently and safely, you've got problems too. We've seen cases where manufacturers didn't understand they had to upload different keys to each device, so they uploaded the same key. So once you'd recovered one, you had all the keys, which was great. There's also issues and challenges around security of that distribution mechanism too, because if someone's feeling malicious, you've got potential issues there. So how do you actually think about securely and safely getting your keys to the production line? And how do you assure that the manufacturer uploads them safely and stores them safely too? Because if their servers at their end aren't robust, you've got problems. We find all sorts of challenges. The key management is a real challenge, particularly around deception or configuration. So an issue we found with some smart locks was actually the challenge of installing them first time round. I believe we were looking at the S2 key exchange process for one of the RF protocols, Z-Wave, and S1, the initial key exchange process, had interception vulnerabilities. S2 was introduced to provide cryptographically sound exchange processes. Unfortunately, you could actually force the lock to downgrade from S2 to S1, which meant you could now intercept the keys. Again, you had to be pretty much next to the lock in order to attack it whilst it was being configured, so very low risk profile, but still, vulnerabilities happen. Other challenges we find. There are lots of organizations that provide device identity. So who, where is your root of trust? If you're supporting cryptographic material from multiple vendors, who and where is your root of trust? Who manages the keys? Who's your CA? These are all real challenges, and we're seeing issues around CAs expiring on smart devices because no one really figured that these things might last more than 5 to 10 years. And we're starting to see CA certificates expire. How do you refresh and update them? As a bit of entertainment, I thought I'd show you an example of some work we did recently, again around automotive, and we were asked to look at the Tesla Model S. We did a probably 3-month-long research project looking at how it pushes firmware to and from the vehicle. Really cool. We love Tesla, by the way. I think their technology is amazing. Build quality, not quite so sure sometimes, but actually the technology and their electric power systems are amazing. This is the inside of the CID, the big display in the car. It came down to it after this, I think, 14-layer PCB, which is incredibly complicated, that there was an SD card that was actually held on the back of the CID PCB, where all the updates were brought to and staged. Once you got access to SD, you could actually start to see how it was done. Actually, Tesla had done some really good work. They had a good CAN gateway protecting the vehicle CAN network from the rest of the system, so the CID and more. Their JTAG interfaces were locked out. Program interfaces were passworded. They'd read the manual about smart device security. It was good. Not perfect though. They were using per vehicle keys. Per vehicle certificates. You could actually extract those from the CID if you wanted to, and then reuse them on another system if you wanted to. But again, I don't see a huge issue around there. Some of the earlier vehicles showed the keys were on that SD card. That wasn't the case with the vehicle we looked at. It was a bit later, and we found that the keys were stored on NAND flash, which is a layer of complexity more difficult to get access to. Once we got that VPN key, we could then connect to literally the server's called the mothership, and it looked like a vehicle. And it looked like the vehicle we got some stuff from had actually been in a car wreck, which wasn't great. We could then pull the firmware because as far as the mothership was concerned, we were the vehicle. And we could also see lots of development notes. There was all sorts going on there, including some real-time issues they were clearly suffering from. But the only challenge was the only real layer of security for the Model S was actually the VPN. We were also a bit surprised once the firmware had been brought down in a really secure, robust process. Once it had been unpacked onto the CID, there was less security as the firmware was being pushed out onto the various ECUs on the car. That was quite interesting, and also you could see the ability to enable some premium functions if we wanted to. The one thing we couldn't figure out is how they extended battery life. You might remember there was a winter storm in the USA, and Tesla increased the range of the battery so people could get home. We couldn't see how that was done, but we could see how various features were enabled. There were some interesting Easter eggs in Tesla. There are Easter eggs everywhere. And one of the things we discovered was that sometimes when the firmware refuses to apply, there is basically the vehicle increases its veracity, so the ability, how hard it tries to push the firmware. And we discovered some quite surprising Easter eggs in terms of the naming of those, how hard it tried to push, all going through saboteur, through relentless to pushy to suicide bomber, which I thought was a bit of an unusual way of naming their firmware push mechanisms. Anyway, to conclude, actually Tesla did some really cool stuff. We were really quite pleased how they put it together, although there were some oversights, which actually they've addressed in the Model 3 update process, and we didn't publish this until Tesla had refreshed their update processes. Finally, I'd like just to touch on my marvelous and entertaining talking doll. Bear with me. The concept of user identity is important too, and this is my wonderful swearing doll, my friend Kayla. She is Bluetooth enabled, microphone and speaker. She can talk to your child. All the voice processing, is done on your smartphone. She's effectively Bluetooth speaker, microphone. She's effectively a Bluetooth headset, so you can connect her to your smart device and actually make telephone calls on the doll if you want. Get some very odd looks though. Unfortunately, in terms of being used to steal identity, this device, remember, microphone, connects over Bluetooth. So it doesn't have any pairing security. It uses Bluetooth Classic, so Bluetooth EDR, and there's no pairing pin, which means that anyone within range, so street outside, next apartment over, can actually connect to this using something as simple as a phone and listen to your kids if they wish to, or talk to them as well. So this little doll, lovely and cute, interactive, unfortunately is also a spy bug. She's actually been banned in Germany and numerous European states because of the lack of security and privacy on her, which was fun. We thought we'd have a bit of fun a few years ago, and a couple of my colleagues worked out how we could make this innocent little dolly swear. It's on our website if you want to see it. She's quite rude. If you like profanities, she's your doll. Anyway, Another area we've been looking at is the area of smart watches. Now, we're seeing a lot of watches being used. They're given to children. They have a SIM card and GSM connectivity in there. They have GPS too, and they can be used to put on your child. So if they're out going to the play park and they wander off, you can track them using your phone. Great idea. Unfortunately, completely vulnerable. We've looked at numerous different brands of watch. In fact, I think this is the one that was the very first we did. It's a brand called MySafes, and anyone could track your child or speak to them through the microphone on the watch. Properly creepy. We had some fun with my friend Troy Hunt, who runs Have I Been Pwned, amazing security researcher, and he gave us permission to put a watch on his daughter, who was at her tennis club in Surfers Paradise in Brisbane, and we showed my wonderful colleague Vangelis showed that he could rewrite her position and drop her into the ocean if he wanted. So wonderfully vulnerable, wonderfully insecure watches. You can make kids look like they've gone anywhere around the world. We can also do crazy things. So high-end vehicles have often got tracking devices. The biggest brand's called Tracker. We discovered using vulnerabilities in the API. Again, my wonderful friend Vangelis discovered he could rewrite positions of vehicles. He could also stop the vehicle reporting it had been stolen, or even take control of people's passwords through an insecure direct object reference. So do watch out for vulnerabilities in car alarms and car trackers. There's all sorts of crazy stuff you can do there. There is some good news, though, to wrap up. There are new regulations emerging in the field of IoT. There are various countries around the world who are making some real efforts to actually protect us from manufacturers who don't take security of our data seriously. In the EU, ENISA, so the European Security Agency, is working hard on some regulations. They're already in place for OT, so industrial control systems, and there's also some good guidance and regulation coming to make sure that smart devices are safe and secure. In the UK, we have the Department for Culture, Media and Sports Security Code of Conduct. I'd actually recommend reading it. It's a really good resource for both manufacturers and security researchers alike. And there's regulation pending in the UK right now. One of the ones I'm most proud of, though, California Senate Bill 327. It made reasonable security features for smart products mandatory from January the 1st, 2020. And the bit I was most proud about was the senator who introduced the bill cited some of our work on My Friend Kayla, the talking doll, as the catalyst behind the regulation. So that is now law. There is law protecting Californian consumers from vulnerable smart devices. So that was a real win, and I'm super proud of that. So that's me. We tweet about smart device security most days of the week. There's all sorts of work on our blog. On there you'll find much more information about us. So we carry a lot of regulated red teaming. We do a lot of work with government. We're also accredited to CREST, which I was a board member of for a long period of time. But if you'd like to find out more about us, use our website. It's there. Thanks very much. Thanks for listening.